All right, guys, welcome to lesson 11. In this section, we're going to talk about linear functions and slope. All right, so lines can be graphed by finding ordered pairs and plotting them. Only 2 points are necessary to graph a line. Sometimes you'll be asked to find a third point just to verify. All right, but the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. The intercepts are often good points to choose from. So if you have your x-intercept, your x-intercept would be some number, and then y is 0. And then your y-intercept would be some number, or 0, and then some number, where x is 0. All right, so if you use those 2 points, all right, that's 2 points. You can go find slope and be on your merry way. Slope is a numerical measurement of steepness and orientation of a straight line. So geometrically, this may be interpreted as rise over run. So if you're looking at a graph, you want to think about slope as rise over run. But algebraically, there's a formula. The difference of y's over difference of x's. Y's are always on top. And if you follow the formula, you can't mess it up. All right? So before we actually get into finding the slope with 2 points, let's talk about graphing these with using intercepts. All right, so I mentioned earlier that this equation is y equals mx plus b. Well, m is slope, and b is your y-intercept. That's your starting point. So for number 1 here, I know that 6 is my y-intercept, and then to find my x-intercept, you set everything equal to 0 because you're going to let y be 0, and so you say 0 equals negative 2x plus 6, and then you solve for x, and so it's going to be negative 2x equals 6, x equals 3. All right, so you have 6 here. Let's say 3 is here, and then you connect your dots. So those are 2 points. Those are 2 points. You connect the dots, and you got your line. 2 and 3 are special situations. All right, so if f of x equals negative 3 on number 2, that means no matter what x is, it always equals negative 3. So let's say negative 3 is right here. That means no matter what x is, y is always negative 3. Y is always negative 3, so that's a flat line, a horizontal line. Okay, so this is horizontal. So f of x equals a number, y equals a number, that's your equation. If x equals a number, it doesn't matter what y is, what you plug in for y, x is always negative 3. So let's say negative 3 is right here, and no matter what y is, x is always negative 3. So you end up with a vertical line. Okay, so this is vertical. And it's always x equals a number for your equation. All right, number 4. This is a different way of writing it. Everything's on the same side. So the first thing you can do is you can solve everything for y. Okay, so that'd be negative 5y equals negative 4x. And then divide y equals 4/5 x. Well, in this situation, my starting point is 0. All right, so my x and y-intercept are the same because everything is at 0, 0. In this situation, you would need to find a second point. So you can either plug in 1 for x or whatever, and this is where slope comes into play. So if you think about rise over run, all right, you take your slope, you rise 4, and run 5. So I have the second point at 5, 4, and I connect my dots. All right, and so that's how you do that with intercepts. All right, the slope of a line can be found only if the line is non-vertical. If the line is vertical, the slope is undefined. These are all the different ways you can write the equation of a line. And so you have your slope-intercept form, point slope, and point slope is just really a means to an end. It's a starting point. So if you have a point and a slope, literally you just plug them in and then go find your equation in slope-intercept form. Sometimes they may ask you to write in general form. General form, and it's also referred to as standard form. And sometimes the C's on the side with everything else, and sometimes everything all your variables equals c. So c could be on one side or the other, but if your x's and y's are on the same side, that's general or standard form. And then of course we've already talked about horizontal line, vertical line. You have y equals a number and x equals a number. Okay, finding slopes. So x1, y1, x2, y2. All right, and if you follow your formula, it's y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So if you follow the formula, you can't mess it up. So my slope here is negative 3 minus 8 over 2 minus negative 4. All right, so on top, if the signs are the same, you add and keep the sign. So it's going to be negative 11. If the signs are different, you add and keep the sign of the larger. So here I got two negatives, and when you have two negatives, it turns into a positive. So 2 plus 4 is 6. So my answer here is negative 11 over 6. All right. On 6, you have negative 4 minus 7 over 2 minus 2. All right, that's going to be negative 11 on top and 0 on the bottom. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, well, let me jump over to 7 real quick. So if I do negative 3 minus negative 3 over negative 2 minus 5, that's going to be 0 on top, negative 7 on the bottom. So you have two fractions. 0 is either in the bottom or the top. So you ask yourself this question. If 0 is on the bottom, what times 0 gives me the numerator? If 0 is on the bottom, what times the denominator gives me 0? All right, that question will lead you to your answer for slope. All right, there is nothing I can multiply by 0 and get a second number out that's not 0. So on 6, there's nothing I can multiply by 0 and get negative 11. So in that situation, it's undefined. All right, on 7, I can multiply negative 7 by 0 and get 0 on the top. So my slope is 0. Okay, all right, so watch what happened here. My x is repeated, and I got a slope of undefined. On 7, my y is repeated, and I got a slope of 0. That's key. All right, so a couple things to make mention of. When the x's are the same, slope is undefined, and the line is vertical. All right, and then when the y's are the same, slope is 0, and the line is horizontal. Okay, so those 6 and 7 are your special cases. One of them is a horizontal line, one is a vertical line. All right, and it's imperative that you recognize when you're dealing with which one. All right, so number 8 says find slope from an equation. Okay, so we're solving for y. So we got 3y equals negative 4x plus 12. Divide by 3. Y equals negative 4/3 x plus 12 divided by 3 is 4. Okay, so my slope is negative 4/3. So your slope lives right in front of x. All right, so that's your answer. On number 9, I'm solving for y again. You got negative 5y equals negative 2x plus 10. Divide by negative 5, y equals positive 2/5 x. And then 10 divided by 5 is 2, and it's a positive divided by a negative, so it's minus 2. And therefore my slope is positive 2/5. Okay, so let's talk in general terms for a second. So if I have this general form, ax plus by equals c, and I solve this for y, so that would be by equals negative ax plus c, divide by b, you get negative a over b x plus c over b. Okay, all right, so if you're talking about general terms, and you find yourself in a situation like you did on number 9, where you're trying to find the slope and or the y-intercept when it's in general form or standard form, there's a shortcut that you can use to find either the slope or the y-intercept using negative a over b or c over b to get your slope or y-intercept respectively. All right, so that's just something nice to know. You don't always you can have to use the shortcut, but it's there if you want it. All right, so number 10, it says graph the line passing through the point -1, 5, and have the slope of -5/3. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We got -1, 5. So let's see, we got, let's see, -1, 5. There's my first point, and then it has a slope of -5/3. So -5/3, again, graphically, that means it's rise over run. And if the slope is negative, that means it's going down from left to right. So I first go down 5, that puts me back on the x-axis, and then I'm going to go right 3. So right 1 is 0, and then I got 1, and then 2. All right, so there's my second point. And then I connect my dots. And there's your line. So you start with your first point, -1, 5, and then you use your slope to find your second point. Down 5, right 3, and then you're good. All right, so remember, the slope is negative if it's going down from left to right. And then if your slope is negative and you're doing rise over run, only one of them needs to be negative. It's either down is negative and left is negative. Okay, so you only need to use the negative one time. So in this situation, you could do -5 over your +3, or you could do 5 over -3. Either way, but you only use the negative once. If you use it twice, that's the same thing as a positive slope. All right, because like a negative over a negative is positive, so keep that in mind. All right, so here's a quick recap of what we talked about. You have a positive slope, a negative slope, a horizontal slope of 0, and a vertical slope of undefined. All right, so these are the slopes, and these are the lines they go with. We read the slope from left to right. All right, so number 11, we're going to write the equation. We have a point and a slope. So we're going to use the point slope form to set this up. So we have y minus 3 equals -2 times x minus 1. All right, so that's point slope set up. Now I'm going to solve for y. I'm going to take a few steps to do it. I'm going to distribute. So I got -2x plus 2, and then I'm going to move the 3. Y equals -2x plus 5. So that is my equation in slope-intercept form. All right. We have an undefined slope. Well, this is tricky because undefined slope looks like this. All right, and we've already talked about if the slope is undefined, just up here, then it's a vertical line. And a vertical line has an equation of x equals some number. So I look at my point, and it's -8, 4. -8 is my x. And so my equation is simply going to be x equals -8. Now, you could go through the whole process on number 13 with point slope and everything. But this is another one of those situations where if you recognize what's going on, it can save yourself some steps and time. Okay, so my slope is 0, which means I'm dealing with a horizontal line. And if you know that the equation of a horizontal line is always y equals some number, you take a look at your point, 5, -8. -8 is my y. So my equation for this is going to be y equals -8. Now again, you can use point slope form and do all the work like we did on number 11, or you could just recognize it and jump to the answer. All right, so 14, we're going to write this in general form. Okay, so we have a slope that we need to find. So we got 4 minus 3, 3 minus -1. That's going to give me 1 on top, 4 on the bottom. So my slope is 1/4. Now, I'm going to use point slope form, and I'm just going to pick a point. I have 2. I don't need both. And you'll get the same answer regardless of which one you pick. So you just pick one. My preference is to pick something that will match well with the slope, or I'm going to pick one that keeps my number small, if that's not an option. So I'm going to do y minus 3 equals 1/4 x minus -1. Okay, so I got y minus 3 x equals 1/4, or 1/4 x plus, that's going to be plus +1, and then that's going to be 1/4. Now, I'm trying to get it in general form, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to multiply this entire thing by 4, and that's going to get rid of my fractions, and so that's going to be 4y minus 3 equals x plus 1. All right, now I'm going to get my x's and y's and everything to the same side. So that's going to be x minus 4y plus 4, or yeah, plus 4 equals 0. Okay? So that's your answer. All right, so I made a mistake. When I multiply 4 by y, I got 4y, but I didn't multiply by 3. 4 times 3 is 12, so that should be 4y minus 12. And then when I move this over, that should be plus 13. All right? So now, that is your answer. Okay, let's do 15. So I got slope is going to be negative 2 minus 0 over 0 minus 3. I got negative 2 on top, negative 3 on the bottom, which is going to give me a positive 2/3. All right, so I got y minus. I'm going to use my first point of 0, 3, and you'll see why I chose that one in just a second. So I got y minus 0 equals 2/3 x minus 3. Okay, so first of all, and this is not why I picked it, but it just happens to work out, y minus 0 is just y. And then I got 2/3 x. And I picked this one because when I multiply 2/3 by 3, the 3's cancel, and I'm just left with a whole number. So I don't concern myself so much with having a fraction of a slope as a fraction, but it's really helpful when that next number that I multiply by gets rid of the denominator. So in case that, so right now it was y minus 0, so it didn't really matter either way, but because the multiplying fractions is not the big deal. But when you have a fraction for the y-intercept, and then you have to move the number next to y over, and it's not a fraction, or even if it is a fraction, all right, that can get a little dicey, because I know how much students don't like fractions. So this works out, and that ends up being minus 2, and that's my answer. Oops. I'm trying to write it in general form, so I'm going to multiply everything by 3. And I'm going to say this can be 3y equals 2x minus 6. And then I'll get my x's and y's on the same side. Or I'll get everything on the same side. So this is 0 equals 2x minus 3y minus 6. Okay? So in general form, that's your answer. If I wanted to write it in slope-intercept form, this part inside this parentheses would be my answer. And 16 and 17, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it in slope-intercept form. So I think it's easier. Hopefully, you feel the same way. All right. So I got 4 minus 1 over 2 minus 1, so it's going to be 3 over 1, which is just 3. So no fractions this time. So I got y minus 1 equals 3, x minus 1. Y minus 1 equals 3x minus 3. Add the 1, you get y equals 3x minus 2. Okay, so easy peasy. Let's see, 17, I got 2 minus 4 over 2 minus 2. I'm sorry, 2 minus negative 2. And so I got negative 2 over 4, which is going to be negative 1/2. And remember, if you have a fraction that can be simplified, you must simplify it. All right, so every one of my points is even. Every term of my points is even, so it doesn't really matter which one I pick. It's going to help me with that fraction of 1/2. So let's say I got y minus 2 equals negative 1/2 x minus 2. Y minus 2 equals negative 1/2 x plus 1. Add the 2, you get y equals negative 1/2 x plus 3. Okay? So there's that. All right, that was the last one. I hope you got something out of it. Reach out if you need help, and I'll see you in the next lesson.